honor that my friend and my mentor, Mike Frisina, is joining us by way of North Carolina. It has really been an honor for myself that over the years, he has shared such a wealth of information that allowed me to think different. So, Mike, why don't you introduce yourself to our group? And I'm sure many of you already have checked you out, and we can dive right into the first question. I saw this coffee mug on your website that says "Stay Upper Brain." What does that really mean? And welcome.
Well, thanks, Walter. Thank you for having me, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to do something good for you, and that's a learning opportunity. And so, in the course of my 40 plus years of leadership, 22 years in the United States Army Medical Department, 13 years in civilian healthcare executive work, and then the last 13 years with my own teaching, consulting, writing primarily with American College of Healthcare Executives and other national groups around the country, I hit on this idea of human performance. And it's something that's been with me through my entire career. How do you get people to perform at a level that gives you as leaders the outcomes you desire, whether it's in productivity or quality initiative, their teamwork, their problem solving, how they manage change, stress, and stress management dynamics to performance. And what we know now and what we've believed to be true, but we couldn't prove it until we had scientific methods of functional MRIs and some other things, that everything about performance comes down to two primary factors: your technical skill, your talent, your intellect, your IQ, and your behavior capacity. And so I chose to focus on the behavior capacity as the independent variable that ebbs and flows. You typically don't lose your talent, you don't lose your intellect, and you don't lose your IQ and your capability of cognitive performance. What you do lose is a lack of self-awareness on your behavior. And Walter, and to the rest of you, just about every day, I can go through some kind of media and find some leader of renown who has derailed their career and then sometimes permanently derailed their careers because of behavior lapses and behavior incompetence, not technical incompetence. It even can make the late night news show with Jimmy Fallon, where a CFO of Moderna was fired after one day. And he was fired after one day because his behavior of his past employment caught up to Moderna quickly enough that they could fire him after one day. And his career is probably gone. He's probably going to just retire now and move on, if you will. So the whole thing is about behavior. We hear a lot about culture. You build culture off of behaviors. We hear a lot about organizational engagement. You build engagement off of behaviors. Effective leaders, training and developing leaders. They don't need to be trained in necessarily directly in their skill, talent, and intellect. They do if they have a competency gap there, but primarily younger leaders, emerging leaders need to be trained in what I call behavior capacity. And that happens by learning the neuroscience of leadership. Everything about leadership today is brain science. Everything about culture is brain science. Everything about emerging leader development is brain science. How the brain actually works. So getting someone's brain to work the way their brain is designed to work so they can connect to their skill, talent, and intellect is what drives performance, it's what drives engagement, it's what drives effective leadership, and ultimately it's what drives performance at the end of the day for senior leaders and their KPIs and strategic objectives of the organization. So stay upper brain means get to the part of your brain physically, your prefrontal cortex, right here behind your forehead. Stay out of your lower brain, which is your fear threat management brain. And my goodness, for the last 2.5 years, just about everybody has been stuck in their lower brain, managing fear, managing threat, managing worry, doubt, anxiety, managing volatility, managing uncertainty, managing change and complexity of change, and managing ambiguity. What's the right answer? There seems to be a multiple number of answers that seem reasonable to choose to execute, but how do you know which one to pick? All of that morass of fear, it resides in the lower brain. And if that's where you are, you lose cognitive capacity, you lose the ability to critically think and reason, you lose the ability to connect in your own skill, talent, and intellect right up here in the prefrontal cortex, because when cortisol is a neurostimulator, neurochemical, produced from the lower brain parts of the brain, the amygdala of the brain specifically, it literally shuts down the prefrontal cortex. So the mantra of stay upper brain means do everything you can to get out of fear, loss, doubt, worry, anxiety, connect to the part of the brain that is your performance and well-being brain, stay there and make great things happen for you personally and for your organization.
Yeah, that's and to sum that up in the three letters that you taught me a long time ago, that live events are going to happen. It's
Yep.
how we respond to them from the upper brain versus reacting things from the lower brain is going to determine the outcomes. And knowing that we there's a gap of knowledge around this topic, right? We cannot talk about it often enough. But I see that the implications today, especially now that over 750,000 healthcare workers have left the job for a variety of reasons, but many of them because they just don't see a future, they don't feel hope, and they don't feel inspired by the work they do because of all the pressures that they had, and most of that came from that fear factor,
Hmm.
that reaction, reactive behavior, so to speak. So we know today that leaders, the latest studies show that 87% of them are fully aware that leadership development, spending time with our emerging leaders, is an absolute must do in order to be able to create loyalty and work on the workforce engagement piece, and making sure that we retain and recruit the right people for the right roles to get our organizations to perform, especially in uncertain times. Sadly, only 5% of those leaders make the investments, take the actions that are notable, that are worthy to allow these emerging leaders to learn to lead at the top of their license rather than struggle along the way. Any insight on that, on how that really, how you see the world today and how we can overcome that?
Yeah, part of that answer resides in the fact that many senior leaders do not maintain an upper brain orientation through the course of their day. Crisis management is a lower brain neurophysiological response. So, having a priority, setting priorities, being willing to have the courage and the intentionality and a sense of purposefulness to stay connected to the things that matter most. Rather than being driven by the urgent. And if we could ever get out of this behavior dynamic that's driven by thinking, that the important urgent is what drives us rather than the important not urgent, as Stephen Covey said back in 1986. And we've known this for such a long time. But the fundamental thing is if you don't change your thinking about something, you don't change what you believe, and you don't change how you behave. So nothing changes till your thinking changes. And until senior leaders really believe in their thinking that investing in their emerging leaders, which is going to save them money and increase productivity and performance, there is this dichotomy of thought that somehow it's easier and cheaper to invest in replacing someone than it does in keeping and investing and retaining the talent that I have. And we see this all the time, where time and time and time again, decade after decade, it seems that talent management, senior human resource people, and senior leaders just have this idea that we can chew people up, spit them out, and replace them, and that human beings are a fungible commodity. But not today. You're going to take a long time and a lot of money to replace somebody in your organization today. So here's a truism that you can take from our time together this morning. It's going to be more cost effective, it's going to be more efficient, and it's going to be more effective to the well-being of your organization to take money and spend it in investing in developing and retaining the talent you have than burning them out and then having to spend exorbitant amount, exponential more amount of money to have to try to re-recruit, retrain, and replace. And then salary creep comes in and you're going to be paying them at a higher salary through salary creep to get them than if you just simply took much less money, much less time, and much less effort to invest in the people that you already have. They're a known commodity. Their skill, talent level, and intellect is already known. You develop them not just in their technical skill capacity, but you have to engage them in the behavior component. And this is where I talk about leaders showing up. How do you show up as a leader in your behavior? Because that's the prerequisite for people connecting and engaging with you as their leader and connecting and engaging with their work. Individual leader behavior. And I'm going to slow down and say this. And this is something, again, if you take away three things, this is one to take away. Your individual behavior as a leader is the singular most important predictor to how your organization and your teams and the members of your organization perform, right? So if you show up as a leader in your lower brain, you show up and your behavior is rude, it's demeaning, you show up with a sense of fear, loss, doubt, worry, anxiety, everybody around you feeds off of that as a leader. And so this whole dynamic of how a leader shows up in their behavior is absolutely critical to what happens to the brains of their people, being able to lead their brains of their people to higher levels of performance, which, by the way, is the title of my new book with the American College Healthcare Executives, hopefully coming out this summer.
Excellent.
Walter Gabriel has posted something. Speaking of behavior, how do you practice observing, describing, and participating in order to be effective at interpersonal effectiveness and objectives, effectiveness as a manager and a leader? Gabriel, there are key behaviors that leaders can engage in that contribute to 4 fundamental human needs that excite the upper brain for connection and well-being. And these 4 things are trust, compassion, safety, and hope. Trust, compassion, safety, and hope. So if you show up as a leader, if your executive presence is such that you are trustworthy, people believe what you say, your word matters, you're not duplicitous, you're going to build a trust dynamic that secretes oxytocin in the human brain. And the brain tells us when to trust a leader. We don't trust a leader based on their charisma. We don't trust a leader based on their technical skill. Our brain tells us when to trust a leader because their behavior as a leader is stimulating our oxytocin, which is a social bonding neurochemical necessary for trust. Paul Zak is someone who has studied and done this work for many, many decades. I tout him as probably the foremost thought leader on this idea of building trust and how you build trust as a leader, just as one component of these behavior dynamics that create highly effective leaders. Then there's the compassion component, demonstrating that you actually care about people at the human level, not just caring for them so they'll give you the outcomes that you desire as a leader. Safety as a leader. I know of meetings where leaders lose their temper. They throw empty soda bottles or a water bottle across the room. There's all kinds of behavior like this that just blocks out the ability of people to connect to their upper brain. And then hope that no matter how difficult things are today, tomorrow can be a better day. And this goes back to the thought equation that Walter alluded to earlier, and that is events happen, life happens. You have 2 choices when life happens, and life happens significantly in a challenging, volatile, uncertain, disruptive way. The least thing that you want to do, the least effective thing you want to do, is take a very difficult, challenging life event and choose to respond poorly to it to minimize the outcome, where you could choose to go upper brain and respond more appropriately, more effectively, and then affect the outcome by how you're choosing to respond to the event. You never take a difficult situation in life, whether it's a personal medical diagnosis, whether it's a challenging pandemic to the organizational dynamic, and make it worse by choosing to respond poorly. And you choose to respond poorly when you illegitimately go to your lower brain. Another question: certainly makes sense to build on a foundation of truth and honesty. Leadership is the key to that success. Effective leadership, Yamil, really starts with your self-awareness as a leader and then your self-management. If you're self-aware of your behavior, effective behavior versus ineffective behavior, behaviors that build trust, compassion, safety, and hope, and you self-manage that, you stay upper brain and you manage yourself well, they all create a coefficient of effective leadership that connects to organizational culture that now creates organizational engagement. And organizational engagement becomes the differential equation, the differentiating, the independent variable for connecting to your skill, talent, and intellect that then drives performance. So there are 3 cascading equations. Effective leadership built off of self-awareness and self-management. Effective culture that is sustained by effective leader behaviors to create engagement. And engagement becomes the foundation of behavior capacity that drives your technical skills to higher levels of outcome performance and well-being of members of the organization. And that's the science of performance. That's the science of effective leadership. And it's the neuroscience dynamic of performance and leadership brought together.
I would recommend that everybody goes back and listens to this almost like in a slow motion to really absorb the information and process this, right? So one thing I always, it's kind of funny is that, there are executive leaders and there are many more emerging leaders who aspire to go up to the ranks and become executive leaders themselves at some point in time. Sometimes I scratch my head as to how did these executive leaders get to where they want, because they certainly don't have the behaviors that we would think are prudent to running a healthy business. So therefore, a lot of the emerging leaders, they tend to emulate what their boss is like, which is not always the right path to choose. So we talk about executives who need to invest in them, in their leadership, their own leadership, but also leadership development of the emerging leader. But what is the responsibility of the emerging leader to break away from maybe poor examples, and how to generate a path forward on how they can start developing and really thinking about their upper brain? How would you suggest they get started?
It goes back to this universal principle of how we treat each other as human beings, and that is treating someone the way they deserve to be treated because they're simply a human being. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule is do to others what affects their upper brain in trust, compassion, and safety and hope. So they reciprocate that trust, compassion, and safety and hope back to you. There are 4 fundamental brain patterns. Each of us has one. It can be assessed by a science psychometric tool. And once you learn what your brain pattern is and you learn the brain pattern of somebody else, then it's incumbent to behave in ways that connect you into their brain pattern. Typically, we think about what we like and what makes us feel good and how we want people to treat us, and we treat people exactly the same way that we like to be treated. That works for somebody whose brain pattern is identical to yours. It doesn't work for somebody whose brain pattern is the opposite of yours. So the key is knowing what the other person's brain pattern is, knowing what the other person appreciates in behavior, knowing what the other person believes and perceives and receives in the actual demonstration of behavior. Remember, what makes the study of behavior scientific, it's observable and it's measurable. You can't do that with personality. We don't do any work with personality. We don't do any work with personality assessment tools because they don't link directly to human performance. What links to performance is behavior. Leading someone's brain in such a way that their brain feels trust, compassion, safety, and hope, really feels it in the behavior that exchanges between human beings. Okay. So once you know that, and once you can figure the key out of how to behave into someone else's pattern, then the neurochemistry does the rest. Oxytocin, serotonin takes over with dopamine, norepinephrine. You keep cortisol, which is a fear trigger response neurochemical, low. And you make the brain work the way their brain is designed to work. They connect with you. They connect with their job. They manage stress well. They manage conflict and frustration well. They're highly engaged, which means they're avoiding disengagement and burnout. And all of this has a neuroscience, neurochemical, neurophysiological dynamic to that. Now, to your point about young emerging leaders, they need to know this about themselves. Now, let's do a quick qualitative study with our participants, and you can just write into the chat box very quickly. Hopefully, all of you have had a chance to work for a highly effective leader. If that leader contacted you today and said, I've got a place for you on a new team with a new venture, would you please come join me? You'd have to give it serious consideration. In one word attributes, what makes your ideal effective leader your ideal effective leader? What would that be? And we'll see if we can get some streaming waterfall going in the chat room. But Walter, to get it started, give me one attribute of your ideal leader, best person you've ever worked for as a leader.
The best part is willing to give time to for me to learn, to become a better leader.
So they focused on you. They invested on you. They were other
willing
focused,
to invest,
not self-centered.
Correct.
Sure. Okay. Give me another one.
Well, trust bond, right?
There it is.
I think it's really the key one is that if I can feel that I have a safety zone where I can share my inner thoughts with somebody, and also knowing and fully expecting that, that stays between the two of us is really, really important to develop that good, strong trust bond.
Give me another one. Just reel them off. Claudio, thank you. Loyalty. Claudio, I bet you that because of your response, and the first one that came off of your brain as an effective leader, if I was going to be an effective leader for you, I better be loyal. That also means I better be able to tell the truth. I better be trustworthy. I better be real. I better not be a phony. I better not be faking it to make it. What I know about you, Claudio, just from your response, from your brain pattern, I get to lie to you once. I don't get to lie to you twice. If I do it a second time as a leader, you'll cut me off. We'll have minimal amount of connection that'll drive your performance. You come to work looking how to play safe and be safe rather than perform. Dwight put purpose driven. Dwight, I would suspect that you're someone who likes to execute, that you're a person whose brain is set up to get information, get it quickly, figure out a course of action, and then go get things done. How am I doing so far? Are you amazed that you can put up one word, and in one word, I can do an analysis of what I believe your brain pattern to be? And because of that, I know exactly how I need to behave with you to maximize your upper brain dynamic, lead your brain, keep your brain in the upper brain, help you stay upper brain when life gets difficult, when work gets difficult. And this is how this works as a performance strategy. Behavior is the new performance strategy. There isn't enough technical skill development. There isn't enough growth of someone's IQ that can take the place of the complexity of the workplace today, the pace of change, the volatility, the uncertainty, the ambiguity. Behavior, understanding human behavior as a leader, knowing how to coach behaviors effectively. This is the new performance strategy. Behavior is the new performance strategy, leveraging the understanding of human behavior and these four fundamental brain patterns as a leader, being able to assess them with a scientific assessment tool, and use that data so that you know what the brain patterns of each of your team members look like. You know how to behave into each one of those patterns, right? Dwight needs me as a leader to give him the information, give it to him quickly, get out of his way, and let him execute. Claudio needs time to get information, to process it, to validate it, to set up a prototype. So Claudio's work is naturally going to be a little bit slower in response to execution than Dwight, who is a big risk taker. Claudio is less of a risk taker. And now I know how to work with both of them as team members on my team. And when I do that, I'm literally now doing what I call leading the brains of my team members to higher levels of performance. And when I do that, they get a natural degree of well-being in the and disengagement and burnout. And this is how you use what I'm teaching you all today very quickly as a performance strategy.
Yeah. So I refer to those as intrinsic values, right? Really, what is my intrinsic value? And we as leaders need to find the recognition, recognizing now in those that we lead. There's a book, Gary Kaplan, I'm sure you're familiar, The 5 Love Languages. People, ask me the question, what about this language that we speak? How do we better understand, the males and females? I said, although the love language book is written for relationships, but think about that in business. All we are doing is building relationships and true partnerships, and we need to learn to speak each other's language in order to really make these deep connections. So what you said is spot on in that regard.
Yeah, and it isn't just a relationship connection; it's a brain connection. It's getting the brain of the other person set up. Look, I've said for decades that what I do and what I've been trying to do as a leader through 40 plus years of leader development, but executive work, whether it's military, civilian, and now teaching, is I just call it neurochemical bartending. And I like to call it that for fun. See, if you know how to mix the right drink in somebody's head, they'll follow you anywhere. So whether if it's a personal relationship, if you mix the right drink in their head by how they receive your behavior, and your behavior has to be what connects to them, right? So in what you just brought up regarding love languages, right, which I just call relationship languages, right? If I know how to mix the right drink in somebody's head, whose love language, their sense of understanding, appreciation, and thoughtfulness, trust, compassion, safety, and hope, right, is in by receiving tangible gifts, then if I give them tangible gifts, their brain lights up like the 4th of July. For some people, it's non-sexual affection, it's touch. So holding somebody's hand in a non-sexual way, affirming way, letting them know, I care for you, I'm here for you. Sometimes it's just an arm around a shoulder, right? There are, and tragically, we've lost a sense of affirming touch in a way that expresses as compassion because of sexual harassment and other sorts of things. But the love language is embedded in the overall dynamic of how the person's brain works. So again, at work, if I know, for example, that Dwight is fast-paced, task-focused, and I set up a work environment for Dwight's brain to function that way, Dwight's not only going to give me a high-level performance outcome, he's going to feel really great about his job. He's going to be engaged. It's going to create loyalty to me as a leader, loyalty to the organization. And this is how you build retention. This is how I get Dwight staying with me as a leader in my organization for the next 20, 25 years. Claudio's different. Claudio and Dwight share a similarity that they're both task focused, but Claudio needs a higher degree of certainty to execute. His inner trust dynamic, his inner safety switch is built on reliability and predictability of following a pattern and process to a predictable outcome. Dwight gets bored with that. He's all about messing with predictability and enjoying the idea of being a high risk taker and being in a spontaneous environment. And guys, thank you for letting me use you in the talk today for this to expose the concept and the validity of the concept. So if you've got Dwight and Claudio on the same team, there isn't a one size fits all leadership dynamic. This is about knowing and how to behave into the pattern of your team members, both in a way that relates to them in the way their brain works to produce outcomes and well-being, but also in creating that inner dynamic of trust, compassion, safety, and hope, which are the high relational triggers that make them want to stay with me as a leader and stay with the organization to build a high degree of retention and loyalty long term.
The key is for the leader is to ask those questions, right? To sit with their emerging leaders or their team members and having that conversation. What is it that makes you take what is your intrinsic value, and not make this an assumption or come with a cookie cutter approach. Mike, as we wrapping up the talk today, I know you have a new book coming out. Why don't you give us a couple of minute version of what is in it, what can we get excited about, and more importantly, why should people actually read a book and actually absorb the information? How can we grow from that?
Well, it'll be an e-version too, but the title of the book is Leading with Your Upper Brain, and driving performance through this neuroscience concept and making behavior the new strategy for performance. The brain loves the number 3. So we were very deliberate in setting the book up to be an easy read because your brain will like the construct of the book. There's 3 parts, part 1, 2, 3. There are 3 chapters of each part, and there are 3 key learning dynamics to each chapter. And so the book itself is broken out into 3 overarching principles. Part 1 is developing yourself as an effective leader with understanding self-awareness and self-management. Part 2 is creating organizational engagement by how you build a performance and well-being culture together. See, for years, we talked about performance culture, performance culture, performance culture. For years, we've talked about helping well-being, creating engagement, avoiding burnout, right? I don't know anybody else who's thought about putting them together. It's not an either or, it's an and. So you can behave the same way to build a performance culture that at the same time creates a culture of well-being for the members of the organization, their health, their well-being, building a healthy organization, a place where people can come to work and not get sick having to get up. I talked to a young man who's been on vacation, an emerging leader, 27 years old, been coaching him for 4 years. And talked to him at the end of last week on Thursday, and he's been on vacation for a week, and he's already getting physically sick with the idea that he had to go back to work today. And he doesn't know what to do about it. He's losing weight. He's having stress-related illnesses. He has irritable bowel syndrome. He can't eat. He's only sleeping about 2 or 3 hours a night because he has insomnia, worrying over his work and his work responsibilities. And Jeffrey Pepper from Stanford wrote a book about 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, dying for a paycheck, that the way we make people work in America to earn a living, to provide for the necessities and creature comforts of their families is killing many people. It's killing them. We're dying for a paycheck. So this isn't new. And this is what I want people to understand. What we've been talking about, and I'll summarize here, it isn't new. what we haven't done, we haven't been willing to change the way we think about what we know to be true. And nothing changes until our thinking changes. So if you want to be a more effective leader, you're going to have to change your thinking about how you were groomed and raised and coached as a leader, and how behavior plays a dynamic role in that. So you have to change your thinking about behavior. And ultimately, you have to change your thinking about, do you as a leader really first care about people? You see, you can care for people without leading them. And this is a great way to end. Now, listen to this. You can care for people without having to lead them. You can never lead people effectively without them believing and knowing in your behavior that you care for them. In order to lead people effectively, you must demonstrate behaviors that you care first. And if you do that, you can affect all 4 behavior patterns. You excite the upper brain. People connect to their upper brain. They engage and connect with their work. And then you as a leader get the performance outcomes and strategic objectives and KPIs that you desire as a leader. Thank you all very much. Thank you, the Dutch mentor, my good friend, Walter. It's been a pleasure to know you over the last 12 years. And I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to join you this morning.
Mike, I'm not going to even add anything to that. It was a fantastic and an awesome 30 minutes. It flew by. I'm sure we could fill a couple more hours if we had to. Thank you for coming on the show today. I look forward to connecting with you sometime in the near future. And folks, we will be back next Monday morning for a chat about leadership. I hope you can join us. Stay engaged, take action every day. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and be safe.